Hey Art One! Today we are going to talk about some different techniques for blending oil pastels. As you can see on the screen, we're going to go through the three main ways that you can blend oil pastels together. And then at the end, I will also talk to you about mixing oil pastels to make new colors. So let's get started. As a reminder, when you are blending colors together, it is going to be easier to use colors that are similar or close to each other on the color wheel. So things like warm colors are going to blend really well together, cool colors are going to blend well. Also consider blending light to dark colors or similar values of colors, so a light color to a light color. For my first example, I will use a red and I will use a light orange, and I'm going to show you the smudging technique. How we'll start is I am going to color with my pastel, pressing down with enough pressure to make it nice and solid. If I go in and don't use as much pressure, it's going to leave some gaps in the pastel, and it's gonna make it a little bit harder to blend. So I wanna go in and get a lot of oil pastel on my paper by pressing down and using a good amount of pressure. I'm going to take my orange pastel and I am going to blend it in, but first I'm going to color it right up to the red. And I'm coloring in the same direction that I did with my red pastel, filling in the space and using enough pressure to make it solid. For the smudging technique, you can see that the colors are going to blend really smoothly. How you do this is you use your finger or you use a paper towel, and you are going to rub the pastels together. I like to start by rubbing the pastels in the same direction I colored, but sometimes it's helpful to go in the opposite direction where they meet to help kind of get those colors mixing on the page. You'll notice that this does remove some of the pastel off of the paper, and it can kind of move the pastel around. So if you don't like that look, you might not go for the smudging, or you may have to work a little bit harder to get it evened back out after you've blended the colors together. A lot of students like this look because it makes the pastels look soft and blend really easily. So that is smudging your pastels. Our next oil pastel blending technique is going to be called layering. So for this, I'm going to use a dark green and a light green. In layering, you are going to start out very similar to how you did with smudging. I like to work with my darker color first. So I'm going to take my dark green and I'm going to color, pressing down hard to make it nice and solid in one direction. Now the difference, where I want this to start blending into my light green, I'm actually going to let up pressure on my pastel to show some of the paper. Now I'm going to take in my lighter color. I'm going to go from the opposite part of the paper, coloring in the same direction, and I am going to press down hard where I want it solid. The difference between smudging and layering is that I'm actually going to color over or layer my pastels for this blending technique. So with my lighter color, I'm just going to start coloring directly over and into my darker color. You can see that it is already starting to blend. If it's not blending as smoothly as you would want, you can also swirl your pastel, and that will help mix the colors together on the paper. Pastel can be a bit messy, so you might have to wipe off some of the extra little pieces of it. Be careful when you do that not to smudge your pastel. Layering gets you really bright and bold colors because none of the pastel is getting taken off the paper. So if you like this bolder, darker look, I would suggest using layering for your pastel blending. Layering is also Miss Reisenhuber's favorite type of blending, just because of how bright and beautiful the colors look when they're done. The last type of pastel blending we're going to talk about is something called stippling. Stippling is a technique that is used with pencil, pen, and we can also use it with oil pastel. This is a great technique if you are wanting to add texture to your work. So let's say you're making grass, or you just want one area to stand out or look like an impressionist painting. Stippling is great for that. How this works is you're going to take your pastel and you're going to make lots of little lines with the pastel. You want to press down hard enough so that the pastel is dark and doesn't have a lot of gaps in it. And I mean that as in, if you just press down lightly with the pastel, you're gonna see a lot of the paper through. So you gotta put enough pressure on it to make your pastel solid. So this is my first section of dark blue. And when I'm ready to blend it, I'm going to go in and leave more space between my little dashes. The closer together your dashes are, the more solid and dark your color is going to look. But where we want it to blend it, similar to layering, I'm gonna make sure there's some white space. Taking my light blue, I'm gonna go from the other side and do a very similar approach where I am pressing down to fill in the gaps, making lots of little lines. And then where I want these colors to blend, I'm going to start overlapping the light blue into those dark blue little dashes. You can go in and fill in the gaps between them, and you can bring the light blue or whatever color you're blending as far as you want into that darker color. I do like to leave a solid patch of color at the end because the idea is we're going from one color to another. But you can go in and pepper that in where you need to. You can also always go back in with your first color and add in some little dashes as needed to make the blend a little bit more smooth. So again, stippling, this is a great effect if you want a texture, if you want more of a pattern, or if you're going for something like a grass look, or something just where you want a little bit more visual interest. You can blend any two colors this way, but as always, colors that are similar or closer to each other on the color wheel are going to blend the smoothest. The last thing I want to talk to you about is color mixing, which is where we make an entirely new pastel color. So thankfully, pastels come in lots of different colors, but you might not have the exact color you need, especially if you're working on something like a portrait or a landscape or a project where you're trying to match a color or get a specific look. You might need to mix your own color of pastel. How we do this is we're going to use this layering technique, but completely cover one color with another. So a lot of times students will use this if they need a lighter color. So I'm gonna pick white, and then I'm going to take this pink pastel. Remember, if your pastels are dirty, that color is going to come off on your paper. So you might wanna wipe it off, which I'm doing off camera, onto a paper towel. Now that that pastel is more clean, it's going to be better to use. When you're mixing a new color, you start by coloring your first color onto the paper. I suggest leaving some room in between your coloring, not pressing down all the way, so that there's room for the second color to blend in. I'm gonna show you two different amounts of pressure. A lot more pressure and a lot less pressure over here. I'm going to use white for both of these. I'm going to color over the first patch of pink, and it blends pretty smoothly, but if you don't want it to look streaky, I suggest circling or smudging your pastel kind of in a round direction to help make it really nice and smooth. For the lighter pink or the less pressure, I'm going to do the same thing, coloring in the pink and white together. And this is going to be a little bit lighter because I put less pink pastel on the paper, and so more of the white is mixing in. So again, layering and completely coloring over helps you make a mixed color or a brand new color for your project that you might not have had before. This is the original pink, and then these are the two new pinks I was able to mix just by layering those colors completely. So oil pastel blending is not difficult, but it can take a little bit of practice. As always, feel free to work in your sketchbook before and practice these techniques. If you are new to them or if you haven't used them in a while, it can be really helpful. You can also test out what colors you want to use in your sketchbook before using them on your final paper.